start us off by stating and spelling your full name for the record?
My name is Kelly Cruz. It's Kellylykruze.
Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Dr. Cruz, can you tell us how you're currently employed?
I am an associate state medical examiner at the Iowa office of the state medical examiner.
And how long have you held the title Associate State Medical Examiner?
Since July of 2018.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background that qualifies you to hold that position?
After I graduated from high school, I attended Tulane University. There I earned a Bachelor's of Science in Anthropology. I then attended St. George's University. I first earned a Master's of Public Health degree, and then I entered their medical school. I graduated from medical school in 2013. Following my graduation from medical school, I completed an anatomic and clinical pathology residency program in addition to a forensic pathology fellowship program. I graduated from that postgraduate training in 2018 and then came to work at the state medical examiner's office.
You mentioned the word fellow or fellowship. Can you tell us what a fellowship is?
A fellowship is very specialized training. After you graduate from medical school, you choose a specialty and have training in that specialty, which is called a residency. If you'd like to further specialize, which I wanted to in forensic pathology, I then completed a fellowship training program.
Looking at your CV, I note that between 2016 and 2017, you were a chief resident in anatomic and clinical pathology at St. Barnabas Medical Center in New Jersey, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us what it means to be a chief resident?
Chief resident is a title that is held during that residency training. It is a title that is provided to you by the doctors that you work with. I held a number of additional job duties on top of my normal resident duties. I was in charge of scheduling, maintaining my other residents, dealing with any issues that arose. It's something that was given to me due to my performance.
You've also used the word pathology a couple of times in explaining your educational background. Can you tell us what pathology means? Pathology
is a specialty within medicine that looks at diseases and disease processes, and specifically how those processes affect the human body.
Can you explain to us what the difference between anatomic and clinical pathology versus a forensic pathology?
Pathology can be broken into two pretty big categories. That's the anatomic pathology and then the clinical pathology. Anatomic pathology looks at whole organs or maybe parts of organs like biopsies. We'll look with the naked eye and we'll look under the microscope to diagnose any sort of disease processes. Clinical pathology looks at more smaller entities and how they can affect the body. It looks at blood cells. It looks at components within your blood. Say you're getting blood work, looking for chemistries. It looks for infectious diseases like viruses and bacteria, and how all of those entities can affect your body. Forensic pathology is technically within anatomic pathology. That's that subspecialty. In forensic pathology, we go a step further. We're not just looking at how disease processes affect the body. We're looking at how disease processes and injury can affect the body, and specifically how those two entities can cause somebody to die.
And you have experience and have been through programs in all three types of those pathologies, correct?
Yes.
What, if any, licensures or certificates do you hold?
I'm licensed to practice medicine in Iowa. I'm also licensed to practice medicine in California. I also am board certified in anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and forensic pathology.
What's the difference between being licensed to practice medicine and being board certified in something?
A license to practice medicine essentially says that I can be a doctor in whatever state I've applied. I go through an application process and a vetting process to make sure I can act appropriately as a doctor. Board certification means that I've completed training and taken an examination that shows that I have shown expertise in whatever field I took the test in. So I took them in all three components of pathology that I did my training in and passed. To maintain my license and my board certification, I have to take tests throughout the year, go to conferences, maintain my education.
Regarding your work experience, your postgraduate training, education, licenses, all of the above, do you keep a record of that documented within a curriculum vitae?
Yes.
And, Your Honor, if I could show the witness what's been previously been marked as State's Exhibit 24A. Do you see that up there, Dr. Cruz?
I do.
And seeing 24A, do you recognize this document?
Yes, that is my CV.
And is it up to date?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the state offers 24A.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
24A is admitted.
Dr. Cruz, as an associate state medical examiner, can you tell us kind of what your primary job duties are?
My primary job is to perform autopsies, and the purpose of an autopsy is to determine the cause of death, so what entity led someone to die, and then the manner of death, which is a description of the circumstances surrounding their death. With that autopsy examination, I write an autopsy report, and then I review and interpret anything that's appropriate to go with that report. Toxicology reports, medical records, law enforcement reports, all of that is contained within my job. I also provide expert testimony. I teach medical students. I'm part of different grants and other things within my office, but autopsy examination is really the main part of my job.
And you've been with the Iowa Office of the State Medical Examiner since 2018, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you guess approximately how many autopsies you yourself have performed since being with the Iowa Office of the State Medical Examiner?
Yes, since I joined the office, I performed over 1,700 autopsies.
Dr. Cruz, when you perform an autopsy, is there an industry standard or protocol or process that's used and how you complete those?
We have standard operating procedures within our office, and those are in line with guidelines from the National Association of Medical Examiners. So generally, autopsies are performed the same way every time.
Can you explain to us what those procedures or that standard is that you operate under?
Our office standard is to perform full autopsies on everyone. That means we perform an external examination that looks at everything on the outside of the body, which includes everything the body may come with, like personal effects and clothing. It involves looking at the outside of the body for defining characteristics like tattoos and any evidence of natural disease or any injury. Then comes the internal examination. So we also look on the inside of the body. We look at every organ. We weigh most of them, and we examine them for any evidence of natural disease or injury. We also take specimens such as blood and urine for toxicology testing.
Dr. Cruz, were you assigned to perform an autopsy on the body of Melody Hoffmanin?
I was.
Tell us how you became involved in the case.
Currently, our office has 6 forensic pathologists. We had 5 at that time, and we essentially rotate. So it was my day to perform autopsies when her body was sent to our office for an autopsy.
When a body is found or located, can you explain to us how a body gets from wherever it's found to the medical examiner's office?
Iowa has a fairly unique system. Iowa has 99 counties, and each of those counties has their own medical examiner. They're all doctors per Iowa code, but most of them are not forensic pathologists like me. So what they do is they will be notified of a death that's sudden, unexpected, outside of a hospital, and they will determine if an autopsy is necessary. Once that medical examiner, or potentially the investigator working underneath them, has determined an autopsy is necessary, then the body is transported to our facility, which is in Ankeny. They can be transported via ambulance or funeral home. Once the body is received by our facility, it's kept in a cooler until the day of autopsy.
So after you're assigned to perform the autopsy on Melody Hoffman, can you tell us what information you receive and how you get that information prior to beginning your autopsy?
Prior to each autopsy, in the very least, I have what we call an intake call. It's documentation from the medical examiner or their investigator when they called us and said, we're sending you a body. Here are some of the circumstances surrounding the death. I may get additional information. We ask for a written report. That might not always come before the autopsy. We also talk to law enforcement. We can get verbal circumstances surrounding the death. Before this autopsy, I knew that there was a woman who was found outside. There was evidence of strangulation and evidence of sharp force injury.
So it's typical then to get background information.
Yes.
And how generally is receiving that information helpful for your process of performing the autopsy?
That information can be used to help guide any additional testing that needs to be done at time of autopsy. As I said, we do the same thing essentially every time. Anything additional would be, say, x-rays if I know someone has been shot. So it helps me prepare prior to the autopsy, but overall I perform the same way I would any autopsy.
Can you walk us through the autopsy that you performed on Melody Hoffman?
So on the day of autopsy, she was received in a body bag. The bodies are transported to us in a body bag. They have a lock on it with numbers on it and a tag with their name on it. That was photographed and the bag was opened. She was then documented as she was received. She was wearing some clothing, like a top, and I noted that it was pulled up. And she was wearing some bottoms, which were pulled down. The external examination involves documenting that clothing. We photographed it in this case after it was removed. Then herself was examined. So I went from head to toe. I documented her hair color, her eye color, if she had any tattoos, any scars, and then I documented injuries that I noted externally. External injuries that I noted were blunt force injuries to her head, her torso, her extremities. She had sharp force injuries to her back, and she had evidence of strangulation around her neck. After that external examination was complete, which involves...
Can I jump in for 1 second? When that external examination is completed, is that done in an as-is condition prior to cleansing the body?
Yes, it's a stepwise process, so the body is always examined as is prior and photographed. In this case, extra evidence was collected, more so than I would do for a case that would not end up being a homicide, like fingernail clippings were obtained. That is something that would be obtained prior to the body being cleaned.
So after you do the as-is examination in the photographing, what happens after that?
Once the body has been photographed and documented as is, then clothing, medical therapy, if it exists, is taken off step by step. It's documented by me. The body is, again, examined by me prior to being cleaned. That would be for any findings that potentially be washed off during that process. Once the body is cleaned, it's again documented. So it's documented and photographed from the front and the back, manipulated so I can look everywhere I need to.
You mentioned several times during your testimony, Dr. Cruz, that during an autopsy, with each step that you're taking, that those steps are being documented.
Yes.
When you're documenting things during the autopsy, are those observations or findings then compiled into an autopsy report?
Yes.
And that autopsy report, is that something that you yourself author?
Yes.
May I show the witness, Your Honor, State's Exhibit 24B? Is that up there? Dr. Cruz, do you recognize what's contained in 24B?
Yes.
And would you agree that this is a 7-page document?
Yes, the autopsy report itself is 7 pages.
And you've answered that question. What's contained in 24B, is that the autopsy report that you yourself authored following the autopsy of Melody Hoffman?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the state offers 24B.
Any objection to 24B?
No objection.
Exhibit 24B is admitted.
Dr. Cruz, during your autopsy, as you're going through and noting and documenting your findings, are you also, or with the help of an assistant, also photographing things during your autopsy?
Yes.
Prior to even beginning the examination, you noted that when bodies are received by the medical examiner's office, that they're in a sealed body bag with a tag on them.
Yes.
Do you also photograph the tag prior to cutting open the lock and opening the bag?
Yes.
What's the purpose behind that?
The purpose of the lock is to maintain chain of custody. At the scene, that county medical examiner or their investigator will document that they closed the body bag and locked it, and they will also write that number down that's on that lock. And this enables me to compare those two numbers to make sure the lock had not been removed and replaced with another one prior to me performing my autopsy.
So the tag that's on the outside of the bag, is that, or does that match with the tag that's on the toe of the decedent inside of the bag?
The outside of the bag also comes with a name tag, and then the decedent themselves will also come with a tag with their name on it, and those two should match.
And when you receive a body, do you then yourself compare the tag from the outside of the bag to the toe tag of the decedent?
I do.
During your autopsy of Melody Hoffman, did you develop pathologic diagnoses during that autopsy?
Yes.
And can you tell us what was or were your pathologic diagnoses?
I have a copy of my report. Is it okay to look while I
Yes.
list them? The pathologic diagnoses, I had 5 main categories. The first was strangulation. So this listed evidence of strangulation from my examination. There was injury externally to the neck, there was injury on the inside of the neck, and there were punctate hemorrhages in the face, the eyelids, within the oral cavity, which are all consistent with strangulation.
And when you say there was evidence externally and internally, what evidence externally on Melody Hoffman's body did you find that evidenced the pathologic diagnoses of strangulation?
Ms. Hoffman had a ligature mark around her neck. It was a linear abrasion, so an abrasion meaning a scrape where the top layer of the skin is removed. That went on the front of the neck, on the sides.
And then you also noted that there was evidence internally as well of strangulation. Can you describe that for us?
For internal evidence of strangulation, I examined the muscles of the neck. There I found bleeding within those muscles, areas of hemorrhage, which showed that there was pressure and force applied in those areas that caused blood vessels to burst and bleeding to occur within those muscles. That was consistent with the external findings of strangulation.
Your report under your strangulation diagnoses also noted petechial hemorrhaging. Can you describe for us firstly what petechial hemorrhaging is?
Petechial hemorrhages are pinpoint hemorrhages really can be anywhere on the body. They occur when there's a lot of pressure in really small, delicate blood vessels, and that pressure causes the blood vessels to burst. In this case, the petechial hemorrhages were indicative of strangulation or some pressure placed on the outside of the neck. The most superficial blood vessels drain blood from the head. So at one point in time, blood was still entering the head, but it was not being drained from the head. Then those small blood vessels filled with blood, and then they burst due to the pressure.
Is the petechial hemorrhaging something that's visible with the naked eye?
Yes.
And where specifically on Melody Hoffman's body did you appreciate petechial hemorrhaging?
She had them on her face, so I could just see them looking at her face. She had them on the insides of her eyelids, which is a very common place to find petechial hemorrhages in someone. And then she also had them in her gums, inside of her mouth.
Under the strangulation diagnosis, your report also noted hemorrhage in bulbar conjunctive. Am I saying that correctly?
Bulbar conjunctiva.
Bulbar conjunctive. What's a bulbar conjunctive?
So you have linings really all over your body. Conjunctiva line the inside of your eyelids and then actually go over the eye globes themselves. She had petechiae in the palpebral conjunctiva, which were in the eyelids, and then larger areas of hemorrhage, so not just those pinpoint ones, but bigger areas of bleeding on the bulbar conjunctiva, which goes over the eyes.
And so the hemorrhaging, both in the bulbar conjunctive and the petechia, the ligature mark, and then the bleeding during your layered dissection, are those all the findings that you made that indicated to you that the diagnosis would have been strangulation in this case?
Yes.
You noted that there were 5 diagnoses. What was your second one?
The second was blunt force injuries. So this listed a number of abrasions or scrapes and contusions or bruises that were essentially head to toe throughout the body.
Can you tell us, I know you've mentioned abrasions and contusions, but what makes something a blunt force injury opposed to another type force injury?
A blunt force injury is an injury that occurs when something with a flat surface touches the body, and that impact can cause damage to the skin. There can be friction to cause an abrasion or the top layer of skin to come off. It can also damage the blood vessels underneath the skin and cause bruising. If it's a significant impact, it can cause the skin to tear, and we can see lacerations in blunt force injuries.
And you noted that during the autopsy you observed blunt force injuries all over the body. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Was there an area of Melody Hoffman's body that suffered more or more significant blunt force injuries?
Many of the injuries were seen in her head and face. She also had injuries to her upper extremities, her arms, her wrists, and her hands.
And what was the third diagnosis, Dr. Cruz?
The third was sharp force injuries. This is where I described cutting wounds and stab wounds to the posterior or the back of her body and then part of her right hand.
Tell us first what makes something a sharp force wound.
A sharp force wound is an injury that occurs upon contact with an object that has a sharp edge. Instead of impacting the skin like a blunt force injury and causing injury that way, actually enters and divides the body, causing clean, open wounds.
You described for us cutting wounds versus stab wounds. Can you explain to us what the difference between those two are?
A cutting wound is a sharp force injury where the length on the surface of the body is longer than the measurement of the depth of the wound inside of the body, and a stab wound is the reverse. So the length of the injury on the outside of the body is a smaller measurement than whatever depth I measure going into the body.
There were 2 additional diagnoses listed on your autopsy report. Can you tell us what those were?
The first was coronary artery and aortic atherosclerosis. It was very mild calcification of one of her coronary arteries and the aorta, which is a big blood vessel that brings blood from your heart to the rest of your body.
And then the 5th one, was that the hepatic steatosis?
Yes, hepatic steatosis is just a fancy word for fatty liver.
So the 4th and 5th pathologic diagnoses, they're part of your findings, but does that mean that necessarily they were caused by someone else?
No. My autopsy documents all of my findings, whether they contributed to the cause of death or not.
Dr. Cruz, during your examination of Melody Hoffman, did you form an opinion as to the cause of her death?
Yes.
And what was that?
Strangulation.
Were you able to determine what the mechanism for the strangulation was?
The mechanism was ligature strangulation.
What other types of strangulation are there?
There are 2 main categories, ligature strangulation and manual strangulation. Here I had that ligature mark around the neck, so ligature strangulation would be appropriate here.
What causes death by strangulation or due to strangulation?
Death from strangulation occurs due to the reduced blood flow to the head, preventing oxygen from entering in the brain, which is something that you need. So when pressure is placed on the outside of the neck, the vessels in the neck will close off, and that prevents the blood flow and then the oxygen delivery to the brain, and that causes the body to shut down and die.
When pressure is put on the neck through ligature strangulation, how long does that take, that you just described, the cutting off of the blood flow, which prevents the oxygen from reaching the brain? How long does that take when someone's being strangled?
It depends on the amount of pressure and how consistent that pressure is, but given consistent pressure, blood flow is reduced essentially immediately, and then unconsciousness can occur in seconds, and then death can occur in minutes.
So prior to death by strangulation, would it be a fair statement to say that Melody would have lost consciousness before she died?
Yes.
So to kill her by strangulation, the pressure, or would the pressure to that neck area have to have continued to occur even after loss of consciousness?
Yes.
If during strangulation you get to the point where the strangled person loses consciousness and the manner, the rope, is released, will that person live, regain consciousness once that blood flow is returned?
Yes, if that is released in time or if they're not dead, then yes, absolutely.
So unconsciousness is not automatic death if blood flow returns.
Correct.
And the continued strangulation after loss of consciousness, you said, would need to continue for several minutes?
Yes.
To cause the type of ligature marks that you observed on Melody Hoffman's throat and neck area, would you offer an opinion regarding the amount of force that would need to be applied to create those injuries?
There have been some studies to say exactly how much force. It's hard to know, but enough to cause the abrasion to her skin, the hemorrhage in the muscles of her neck and for the blood vessels to be closed off.
And when you say the abrasion to the neck, you noted that an abrasion was removal of a layer of skin, correct?
Correct.
And then also the internal injury of the muscle tissue damage inside the throat.
The hemorrhage, yes, in the muscles.
So this strangling object would have had to been pulled pretty hard.
Yes.
Based on the observations that you made regarding the injury to the neck area and the ligature marks, are you able to form an opinion as to where the strangler would have needed to been standing to accomplish this pattern or this type of injury?
I can't tell exactly from my autopsy exactly where people were located, but the ligature mark itself existed on the front of the neck, slightly on the left side of the neck, and significantly on the right side of the neck.
So a lack of injury to the back of the neck, would that suggest to you or be consistent with the strangler standing behind Melody Hoffman at the time that she was strangled?
That's a reasonable interpretation, yes.
Were you able, Dr. Cruz, to form an opinion? We have cause of death being strangulation. Were you able to form an opinion as to the manner of death in this case?
Yes.
And what was that?
Homicide.
Can you tell us what a homicide is?
Homicide is a medical term, and it means death at the hands of another.
During this autopsy, you took several photos, or several photos were taken.
Yes, we took many photos.
Your Honor, I would like to show the witness State's Exhibits C through V, please.
Be 24 C through V.
Yes, sir. Just scrolling through them quickly, Dr. Cruz, do you recognize these as photos that were taken during your autopsy performed on Melody Hoffman?
Yes, I do.
And do these photos fairly and accurately depict the findings made during your autopsy?
Yes.
Do these photos assist in you performing the autopsy, being able to go back and review your reports and opine opinions related to the autopsy?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state offers 24C through 24V.
Any objection?
I just didn't catch the letter of the second or the last exhibit.
V like Victor?
No objection.
Exhibits 24C through 24V are admitted.
May I have permission to publish exhibits, Your Honor?
You may. Publishing now.
Starting first with Exhibit 24C, Dr. Cruz, can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This is a photograph of the outside of the body bag, and it's showing that tag with Ms. Hoffman's name.
Also in this photograph, there is a ruler being used. Can you tell us what the purpose of a ruler being used is?
The purpose of the ruler is for scale, and the ruler also has our internal case number on it for organizational purposes.
And so the 24-01631, that's your internal state medical examiner's office case number?
Yes.
24D, what are we seeing in this photograph?
This is a photograph of what is called a toe tag. This is a tag on the body that is meant to have the decedent's name, and here it says Ms. Hoffman's name and some other information such as when she was found and who placed the tag on her.
The other items in this photograph appear to be some sort of blanket and some debris. Are those the items that were found as is with Melody Hoffman within the body bag?
Yes,
So those arrived with her.
correct.
24E, can you describe for us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This is what we call our as-is photograph. This shows Miss Hoffman as she was received in the body bag. All we have done is opened the bag and taken the picture.
In this photograph, there appear to be objects around the hands of Melody Hoffman. Can you tell us what those objects are?
Her hands are encased in brown paper bags. The purpose of putting the hands in bags is to protect them during transportation. There can be blood or condensation within the body bag. Placing the hands within the bags protects them in case evidence needs to be collected at autopsy.
In State's Exhibit 24F, can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This is what we call an identification photograph. This is Miss Hoffman after she has been cleaned, and it's a photo of the front of her face.
From this photograph, are you able to observe any of the injuries or indicators of the diagnoses that you found during this autopsy?
Yes.
And there should be a laser pointer up there if it helps you at all, Dr. Cruz, and for whatever reason, it only works on the big screen.
Okay. Yes. In this photograph, many blunt force injuries can be appreciated. One of the larger injuries is on the left side of the forehead, where she had abrasions or scrapes. She also has some smaller abrasions or scrapes along her nose, and some bruising and abrasions around both of her eyes. There are more photographs taken, but on her neck, this dark red area is that ligature mark.
Couple of questions. You use the term appreciated. And being familiar with you, I know that that's a term that's used. Can you explain to us what it means from a medical standpoint when you use the term appreciated to describe what you're viewing?
Yes, it seems to be something we say where I'm essentially saying you can see. So these are findings that I found at autopsy that can also be seen in the photographs now.
Earlier, when you were discussing petechia or petechiae, you noted that or testified that they were visible on Melody's face as well. And I can zoom in if you need, if that would be assistive to you. Do you see from this photograph any signs of that petechial hemorrhaging?
The petechial hemorrhages are difficult to see in this photograph. The lighting isn't the best, but there are some. If we look on this left upper eyelid, this tiny little red dot and some tiny little red dots here. Those are all considered petechial hemorrhages, and they'll be better appreciated when we look inside of her eyelids.
Moving on to State's Exhibit 24G, can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This photograph is of the right side of Miss Hoffman's head. Here, I was demonstrating that ligature mark from the strangulation. The ligature mark goes from the front of the neck all the way onto the right side of the neck. The darker red areas are more significantly abraded skin, where we've lost that top layer, and there is some more superficial abrasions or marks here, moving all the way onto the right side of the neck.
Would the difference in the degree of the abrasion be explained or contributed to the amount of pressure that's on that particular part of the neck?
Yes, it's an indicator of pressure, force, amount of friction.
So as we get closer to the back of the neck, this right side of the neck area had less force or pressure being applied to it than the front area.
Yes.
(24H), can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This is the left side of Miss Hoffman's head. Here, looking at her neck, we see some of that ligature mark on the front of the neck, moving slightly onto the left side of the neck, but then we lose it as we move more toward the left. Here, we can also see more blunt force injuries, injury to the left side of the forehead that we saw when looking at the front of her face. And these are two injuries here below her left eyebrow, on her left temple cheek area that I called patterned injuries.
I'm going to ask you more about the patterned injuries later. This angle, would you agree that the ligature marks on the left side of the neck and throat area are less than even the right?
Yes.
In the neck area, there seems to be a difference in coloration where above this certain line, things appear to be darker and more purple, below less dark, less purple. Can you explain to us what would cause the purpling above that neckline or that demarcation line?
That purple discoloration indicates congestion. So those blood vessels, some of which burst and cause the petechial hemorrhages, are filled with blood. And we can essentially see that blood on the surface of the skin, and it causes that discoloration.
And that congestion, is that congestion caused or as a result of the blood flow being cut off during the ligature strangulation?
Yes.
So this would be pooling of the blood that can't get back down.
Yes.
State's Exhibit 24I, can you tell us what we are seeing in this photograph?
This photograph shows the front part of Miss Hoffman's neck. Here where that blue glove is, it's resting on her chin, so we can see the ligature mark on the front of the neck a little better. Here the ligature mark goes from side to side, and there's this line here, a little area of sparing where the skin was not abraded.
Below the ligature mark in this photograph, there is a clustering of darker marks. Can you tell us about these darker marks that are seen?
These darker marks are areas of hemorrhage as a result of the pressure that was placed from the ligature to cause the abrasion. There was also injuries to some blood vessels in the area that were torn. And here we can see where the blood vessels were damaged, and that caused bleeding onto the surface of the skin.
(24J), can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This photograph is highlighting blunt force injuries. This is the left side of the face, and we have blunt force injuries, abrasions, and contusions or bruising on the left side of the forehead, around the left eye. There's some on the left side of the nose, and then below the left eyebrow and to the left of the left eye are those patterned injuries that I had mentioned.
And also, ruler that gives you perspective or proportions for these injuries as well?
Yes.
The darkening seen on Ms. Hoffman's lips, is that also injury related?
That darkening I thought was most likely related to changes after she had died. It's really just drawing of the lips.
States 24K, can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This photograph is showing the underside of the eyelids in Miss Hoffman's right eye. These forceps are pulling up the upper eyelid, and then the blue glove here is pulling down that lower eyelid. The lower eyelid best shows those petechial hemorrhages within the conjunctiva. Here we have these little red dots, and those are all petechial hemorrhages.
And those petechial hemorrhages are indicative to you of the cause of death?
Yes, they were associated with her strangulation.
Tell us what we're seeing in 24L.
24L is showing the petechial hemorrhages within Ms. Hoffman's gums. There's one of the larger ones can be seen here where I'm circling it, and she had these petechial hemorrhages also as a result of the strangulation.
I know that you noted that the petechial hemorrhages show up in the form of dots. Is there anything significant about the bluing, which I'm going to describe them as lines, for lack of a better term, along the gum line into the lips?
Those lines represent blood vessels. They might be a little darker because she is congested, but those vessels do belong there.
States 24M. Can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This photograph shows Ms. Hoffman's back, and these are where the sharp force injuries were identified. On her back, I counted at least 30 cutting wounds. So there are those longer lines here that are intersecting, and then 5 stab wounds, which are these shorter ones here.
From this vantage point, are all 5 of these stab wounds visible?
Yes, I can see them on my screen down here. There are some to her left down at the bottom there.
And those 2 stab wounds that weren't initially visible to the bottom left in 24M, are they visible in 24N?
Yes.
And can you show those to us, please?
These 2 here.
From this angle, can you describe for us this, what I would call bruising pattern, or the difference in skin tone seen here?
This difference in skin color that's well demarcated is called lividity. After a person dies and their heart stops beating, blood will pool according to gravity. It will enter into the small blood vessels in a way that you can see discoloration on the surface of the skin, similar to what we had discussed with the congestion of the face. Here, this is lividity on her left side and then on part of her back, showing where the blood pooled according to gravity.
And so that pooling according to gravity, would that indicate to you that her final resting place was in a face-down position as she's shown on your table here?
Yes. So the blood will pool according to gravity and will actually shift for a period of time until those blood vessels break down and the blood can't move in and out of them anymore. If there's what we call anterior lividity, meaning that the pooling of the blood stays on the front side of the body, we know that the body had been lying prone or face down for a period of time because we received the body lying on its back in the body bag.
You said that this lividity happens over a period of time. Is there any way to say how long it took for this lividity to set or to happen?
There is some guidance in terms of when lividity can become fixed or stuck in one spot for good. We're generally taught about 12 hours, but lividity can become fixed in different places during that 12-hour window. Here, if there is some anterior lividity and say she was found within an hour of her death, we would expect all that lividity to have moved. So it's hard to pinpoint an exact time, but generally people say 12 hours.
The injuries seen in the, I believe this would be the left shoulder area, is that correct?
Yes.
What can you account for these injuries? What type of injuries did you see here?
These shoulder injuries are consistent with, there were many abrasions or blunt force injuries on that left upper extremity, but we also have some of these sharp force injuries that were extending onto the shoulders.
Did you determine during your autopsy a wound path for any of the sharp force injuries?
I did.
Can you tell us about that?
Wound paths were determined for the stab wounds. Cutting wounds are superficial, so I wouldn't say what direction they went in, other than from the outside of the body to the inside of the skin. But for each stab wound, I determined an individual wound path, and they were actually all in the same direction. So each wound path went from back to front, left to right, and downward.
Can you tell us, when you say back to front, would that be back of the body to the front?
Yes, it's in reference to her body.
And in a downward angle?
Yes.
What does downward suggest?
It suggests from top to bottom, going at an angle toward the feet.
So the angle for a downward pathway would be shoulders to feet area?
Yes.
Okay. And then you noted that the cutting wounds, you're not able to tell the direction that those marks, or the path that those marks took.
Correct. They essentially all go from back to front, which is apparent because it's just a cut into the skin.
Were you able to tell or to form an opinion as to whether the sharp force injuries, both the stab and the cutting injuries, whether they occurred before or after death?
I was not.
Do you have an opinion as to whether they occurred post or peri-mortem?
In general, when injuries are sustained, there should be some bleeding involved, that the person is still alive and their heart is beating. These injuries have a very yellow appearance to it, suggesting to me that there's the possibility that her heart was not beating at the time they were sustained, or in the very least, they could have been sustained while she was in the process of dying, which is called the peri-mortem period.
When you said that you could not tell if they were caused after death, someone who is peri-mortem, doesn't have a heartbeat, could still be considered alive. Am I understanding that correctly?
That peri-mortem period is really the process of dying, so a slow heartbeat, eventually it stops.
Would someone in an unconscious state be considered peri-mortem?
If someone were unconscious and then were to die shortly thereafter, then that would be appropriate to say it's in the peri-mortem period. It just depends on the circumstances.
Seeing the condition that Melody Hoffman's body arrived at the medical examiner's office, if these wounds were caused in a live state, something that is pre-peri-mortem, would you have expected to see more blood loss or more blood on her body when she arrived?
It's difficult because sometimes I do get bodies that seem generally bloodless. I would expect blood within that surrounding soft tissue and not have this yellowed appearance, and you would expect some blood associated with it.
So where you're seeing yellow in the tissue, you would expect to be a darker red color opposed to the yellow?
Yes.
And that would indicate to you that the tissue itself, at minimum, was bleeding at the time that these injuries were caused?
Yes, and that blood was going into that tissue. States
24-0, can you tell us I'm going to go back up to N because I'd like you to show us where on the body this was located. Firstly, can you show us in 24M where the injury in O is found on the body?
We're looking at injuries on her right buttock here.
And going back to O, can you tell us what you're seeing or what about this specific injury caused you to photograph it individually?
These sharp force injuries appeared to look slightly different. For example, if we look at this sharp force injury that's running vertically, it's quite thin. And then we have these larger sharp force injuries. These sharp force injuries have the appearance of some sort of sharp object that looks like it was serrated, like a knife, was being dragged along the skin. So there are varying depths of the injury that have a pointed appearance, and that top layer of skin still exists and was essentially pushed aside.
So in regard to the cutting injuries that were found on Melody Hoffman, is it your opinion that they were caused by some sort of a knife or a blade that also contained a serrated edge?
Yes.
Do you believe that the cutting wounds or the cutting wounds and the stab wounds were caused by the same instrument?
These cutting wounds here and the stab wounds were fairly nondescript, so it's hard for me to say, but it is possible that whatever caused this injury with the serrated appearance, that could also have caused those other injuries as well.
24P, can you tell us what we're seeing in this photograph?
This is Ms. Hoffman's right hand and her right wrist. Here we have blunt force injuries or abrasions, the largest of which is an abrasion on her right wrist.
Above the abrasion that you just circled, there seem to be, I would say, 3 darker spots. What, if anything, can you say about those?
There was bruising associated with these abrasions on her right upper extremity. It can be difficult, as we saw with that lividity, to know for sure if they're all consistent with contusions or if there's some lividity, but there was definite bruising on this right hand.
And the dark spot that's noted or visible in the abrasion, is that a tattoo?
Yes.
24Q, can you tell us what we're seeing here?
This is Ms. Hoffman's right hand. Here, that discoloration on the backs of her fingers can be better appreciated and is consistent with bruising. This photo is meant to highlight additional sharp force injuries or cuts that were on her right hand. There are some V-shaped cuts on her fingers right here, and on the side of her hand is a deeper cut.
R, tell us what we're seeing in this image.
This again is Ms. Hoffman's right hand. This shows that deeper cut a little better and some additional injuries moving up that pinky finger.
S, what do we see in this photograph?
This is Ms. Hoffman's left hand. So she had a number of abrasions, the scrapes or the bruises up and down her left upper extremity. There's significant blood on this left thumb from that. There's some abrasions on the back of her hand. Her fingernails have this appearance because the tips of them had already been removed for evidentiary purposes.
And when you say the tips of the fingernails have been removed for evidentiary purposes, is that something that you do during autopsy, is clip and cut low the fingernails to preserve evidence?
Yes.
So there's no independent injury to this area. They were just cut short for that purpose.
That's correct.
24T, what are we seeing in this photo?
This is the side of her left hand, again showing that area where there's an abrasion and significant blood.
24U, can you tell us about this photo and give us some perspective?
This is a photo of the inside of the scalp. In order to remove the brain, an incision is made over the top of the head from ear to ear, and part of the scalp is reflected or essentially turned inside out and moved forward, and the rest is turned inside out and moved back. This is the inside portion of the scalp that was reflected forward. At the top of the screen, we see some yellow and some red, which shows fat and muscle from the inside of her chest. So we're looking at the top of her head and the inside portion of her scalp that corresponds to the front and the top of her head. Here, there are a number of dark spots which all represent contusions or bruises and areas of bleeding within that scalp. And then there is some hemorrhage on the surface of the skull underneath the scalp.
Can you describe for us where the injuries seen on the interior of the scalp would be in relation to Melody's head if and when that skin is put back in its natural state?
If I were to go from essentially closer to her skull away, the large spot here that's closest to her skull would correspond with the left side of the front of her scalp or her forehead region, which is where we had seen that abrasion and the bleeding before. Moving further away, these bruises would correspond from the front of her scalp and then moving back more toward the top, toward the back of her head.
In the crown area?
Yes.
Were you able, from the external examination, I know that you discussed having corresponding injuries visible on the skin in that front left eyebrow temple area. Were you able, through the hair, to see any corresponding injuries for the crown area injuries?
I did not, but I also did not shave her head, so it doesn't mean they could not have been visible. I just was able to appreciate them upon reflection of the scalp.
The dark area in the bottom left hand, well, it would be bottom if it was in the right spot, but this area that I'm circling close to the ruler, is that a contusion or an injury as well, or is that some other?
That appears to be a contusion as well. The bleeding was variable, so some areas were darker and some were lighter.
And to be clear, that area would be corresponding to the back left lower side of the head?
It would be the left towards the top back. That incision is made over the top of the head, and that's toward where that incision would be.
So a lot of mid-crown area forward bruising.
Yes.
Can you describe for us what we're seeing in 24V?
24B is a photo of what we call a layered neck dissection. Layered neck dissections are performed when we are assessing the structures and the muscles of the neck for any evidence of injury. Here, each muscle is separated from each other, and they are examined for areas of bleeding. Notoriously doesn't photograph that well, but there were many areas of hemorrhage within those neck muscles on both sides of the neck.
And what did those areas of hemorrhage indicate to you?
Those areas of hemorrhage to me correlated with that strangulation.
And so the findings from this vantage point also assisted in you drawing the conclusion or forming the opinion that the cause of death in this case was strangulation.
Yes.
Your Honor, if you'll clear my screen. Dr. Cruz, as part of this investigation, were you asked to compare some potential weapons to the injuries that you observed during autopsy to form an opinion as to whether or not those specific weapons were consistent with the injuries you saw?
Yes.
And how did you observe the weapons?
Through photographs.
Regarding specifically, well, were you asked to look at a specific knife?
Yes.
Were you asked to look at minimum, the handle to a machete?
Yes.
Regarding the knife and the machete, did you also, as part of forming an opinion, review 2 short video clips that overlaid weapons over injuries on Melody Hoffman's body?
Yes.
And when you were viewing those video clips, did you use the rulers associated with the original photos of the weapons to the rulers that were used in your photos at the time of autopsy to make sure that the scale during the comparison was correct?
In my opinion, it appeared as though the scale seemed appropriate.
Did you find that viewing those clips helped you form an opinion as to whether or not the weapons you were asked to consider were He's not responding. That's
What's the left? Can you take the picture of this? On the record in FECR 153477, when we left off, Dr. Cruz was testifying, and we're going to continue with that now. Dr. Cruz, you're still under oath, and Ms. Slaughter, you can continue with your examination.
Thank you, Judge. Dr. Cruz, before we took our break, I was discussing with you the short video clips that you viewed in forming an opinion as to whether certain weapons were consistent with certain injuries. And I think we left off at the point where I was asking you if those clips helped you form an opinion as to whether or not the weapon shown to you caused the injuries to Melody Hoffman.
Yes, I viewed the videos, and from the videos and viewing the photographs on my own that had been provided, I determined that those implements could have caused the injuries to Ms. Hoffman.
Your Honor, the state offers 24W and 24X.
Any objection?
No objection.
24W and 24X are admitted.
Dr. Cruz, before I move on, I just want to segue back for a second. when we were going through the photographs that were taken during autopsy, there were some photographs of injuries to Melody Hoffman's hands. Do you recall those?
Yes.
What, if any, opinion can you offer regarding the state of Melody's life when those injuries occurred? Was she pre-mortem, peri-mortem, post-mortem? Do you have an opinion regarding that?
In terms of the blunt force injuries, the abrasions and the contusions, those appear to be ante-mortem or peri-mortem around the time that she died. In terms of the cutting wounds to her hand, there's similar difficulty in interpreting those as I had in the injuries to her back. It's possible they were sustained before she died or in the process of dying. There's also the possibility they were sustained after.
How, if at all, does the lividity that you talked about, the additional bruising appearance of the hands, how does that, if at all, affect your ability to offer an opinion as to when during the lifespan those injuries occurred?
One of the things I looked at with the injuries to her back was the lack of blood within the soft tissue, to me indicating there's a possibility her heart was not beating at the time those injuries were sustained. Difficulty arises when there are pre-existing injuries, so say there were contusions or bruising to that soft tissue, and then a cutting wound was sustained on top of that soft tissue. So then you have blood in that soft tissue, but then it's not really associated with the cutting wound, and that simply makes it difficult to interpret.
Starting first with a rope, were you asked to look at photos of a rope or a paracord associated with this case?
Yes.
And when you were looking at the specific injury of the ligature on the neck, were there any specific characteristics or pattern marks in that ligature mark that you could use to compare to a instrument or a weapon?
No.
So patternless in the ligature.
Correct.
When you observed the injury to the throat or the neck area, can you recall whether or not you did measurements of that?
I did. I measure the ligature itself and then its location on the body, such as the distance from the top of the head.
And what were the measurements of that injury?
The ligature itself varied in width. It went up to about 1/4 of an inch. The distance from the top of the head is something I would have to review in my autopsy report if that's information you would like.
Please.
I measured the distance of the ligature mark from the top of the head, various spots on the head. The first was at the anterior midline, so right at the midline on the front of the face. It was 8.5 inches from the top of the head. It's easier to describe where it goes to the left because it doesn't go very far. It only goes 1 3/4 inches to the left of the anterior midline. And at that point, it was 8 1/4 inches from the top of the head. So slightly upwardly sloping, but not a lot. The ligature mark then went onto the right side of the neck for a significant distance. It passed the right ear at 8 inches from the top of the head and then faded where I couldn't see it anymore at 7 inches from the top of the head and 5 3/4 inches to the right of the midline. So much more onto the right of the neck and then higher up, so upwardly sloping.
When you are describing the distances or the measurements from the injury to the top of the head, when the measurements get shorter, the further away from the center of the throat that they go, does that indicate to you that the strangling object was in an upward angle when it was being pressed or pulled against that neck area?
Yes.
And you said that the ligature itself was approximately 1/4 inch?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I have permission to republish for the jury and to show Dr. Cruz State's Exhibit 18 QQQ?
You may.
Dr. Cruz, I'm going to show you what was submitted and offered to the court as states QQQ. Do you recognize the rope that's contained in that exhibit?
Yes, I do.
And does the rope that was contained in this exhibit appear to be the same rope that you viewed photographs of?
Yes, it appears to be.
The width or dimensions of this rope, are they consistent with you forming an opinion that these could have caused those quarter inch ligature marks on Melody Hoffman's neck?
Yes, I do think that could have caused the ligature mark.
So this rope is consistent with the injuries that you viewed during your autopsy?
Yes.
Similarly, Your Honor, the state would like to republish for the jury and for Dr. Cruz Exhibit 18 PPP.
You may do so.
Dr. Cruz, I want to show you what we have admitted as evidence as 18 PP. Do you recognize the knife that's in this box?
Yes.
And the knife that's in this box, is this the knife in which photographs you viewed in forming your opinion related to this?
Yes.
Was this also the knife that was contained within the video clip that we discussed briefly?
It appears to be yes.
Okay. And just to be clear, on this knife, do you see straight edge as well as serrated edges?
Yes, I see both.
With the court's permission, Your Honor, the state would like to publish 24W and 24X. May I also make a brief record about the exhibit, Your Honor, that 24W and 24X are contained on the same disc that references both exhibit numbers.
All right. You can go ahead and publish at this time.
Dr. Cruz, looking first at 24W, would this be a photograph or is this a photograph that was taken of Melody Hoffman during her autopsy?
This photograph is.
And the smaller photo that's overlaying that, is that the handle to the machete that you were asked to make an opinion about?
Yes, it appears to be yes.
And if I understood your testimony earlier, the scale of the machete handle and the scale in which the autopsy photo are zoomed to, you said would be a fair scale?
It appears fair to me, yes.
After having viewed Dr. Cruz states 24W, the patterned marks on Melody Hoffman's left high cheekbone area that are seen in this exhibit, are the rectangular patterns in the bruises there and to her left eyebrow area consistent with the handle of the machete?
They appear consistent.
And may I publish, Your Honor, 24X?
You may do so.
(24X), Dr. Cruz. Dr. Cruz, in this photograph, is this the injury that you pointed out to us just above the right buttocks area of Melody Hoffman?
Yes, it was on the right buttock area.
And the white ruler shown in this photograph, is this the ruler that was used by yourself during that autopsy?
Yes.
The photo of the knife, which in its form before I play it is a little more difficult to see, but does that also have a ruler associated with it?
It appears to, yes.
And did the inch marks on your ruler and the knife ruler match up?
They do appear to match.
Dr. Cruz, the serrated portion of the knife shown in this clip and the serrated portion seen in 18 PPP that the state brought up there and showed you, is that serrated portion of the blade consistent with the injuries that you had previously opined as having been caused by a serrated blade?
I do think it's possible these injuries could have been caused by that knife.
And so the knife shown in this photo, the knife shown in the box, is it your opinion that they are consistent with the injuries seen on Melody Hoffman's body?
Yes.
As part of the autopsy, are there also samples that are taken from the decedent that are sent out for additional testing?
Yes.
And was that done in the case of Melody Hoffman's autopsy?
Yes.
Can you tell us what types of samples were sent out?
Blood, vitreous fluid, which is fluid from the eyes, and urine were all sent for drug testing and alcohol testing.
Blood, vitreous fluid, and urine?
Yes.
And when you say that's sent out, that is not the type of testing that you yourself do?
No.
And when those were sent out, were all three of them, to your knowledge, tested for drugs and alcohol?
The blood is screened and tested, and to my knowledge, the laboratory then decides whether or not to test the vitreous fluid or the urine as appropriate with their screen with the blood.
What were the results of the chemical testing that was performed on Melody Hoffman's blood?
The blood was negative for alcohol and drugs.
Negative for both.
Yes.
Were there any other laboratory studies done in this case, specifically as it relates to her blood being tested for the HCG?
Yes.
Can you tell us first what HCG hormone is?
HCG is something that is produced when an egg is fertilized. The embryo starts producing this hormone, and ultimately that hormone can be used to test to see if someone is pregnant. There was a request for me to test for that hormone, for that substance within Ms. Hoffman.
And so at the point in time where the embryo is fertilized, HCG HCG starts to be produced by the body naturally.
Yes, it's produced by that.
Is that number an ever-increasing number throughout a pregnancy?
Yes, it should, and it can be tracked if there are issues with the pregnancy, if it's not increasing, so yes.
And was there HCG present in the blood sample that was tested?
Yes.
Now, during the actual autopsy, do you personally examine the internal organs of the body as well?
Yes.
And does that include the uterus?
Yes.
During the internal examination of Melody Hoffmanin, did you see any physical signs in her uterus of a pregnancy period?
No.
And what does that indicate to you if there's HCG present but no physical indication in the uterus of pregnancy?
Well, her level of HCG was 7.3. The reference range is 0 to 5, would be considered normal, so it was low. That, coupled with the absence of what I would say is a grossly identifiable pregnancy, there are two most likely options. One is that she was so early in her pregnancy, I simply couldn't see it. Two was that she was previously pregnant, no longer pregnant, had HCG in her system, was slowly clearing it, and had just not completely cleared it. And when I saw her, she did not have a pregnancy.
So if she was brand new in a pregnancy, how many weeks are we talking here where you wouldn't be able to physically see something in the uterus?
It would be very early on, say 2 weeks would be appropriate.
If there was a pregnancy that, for whatever reason, ceased and there was a miscarriage, would the HCG levels in a person's blood then start to decrease?
Yes, they should.
That's not something that goes from 10 to 0, right?
Correct. It's something that your doctor can actually track over time.
So it would show a steady decrease in the numbers.
It should decrease, yes.
At the point of miscarrying a pregnancy and a period happens, once that miscarriage, for lack of a better term, is flushed from the body, it's still possible to see HCG in the blood?
Yes.
Okay, so even after a period, those numbers could still be present and declining?
Yes.
So are you able to opine specifically whether she was newly pregnant or having recently experienced a miscarriage?
I cannot tell, no.
But at some point, there was a fertilized egg in utero in Melody Hoffmanin.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Enough to be showing the pregnancy hormone in her blood sample.
Yes.
If you said that if the levels indicated an active pregnancy, that it would be a very early pregnancy, correct?
Correct.
The levels that were present, would they be present soon after having missed the period? Would they show that by that point?
It depends on her cycle. Every woman is different. It's possible that she did miss her period.
So possible that at minimum she could say, hey, I missed my period.
Yes, it's possible.
I'm late.
Yes.
Okay. And Dr. Cruz, I know that we already admitted your CV and your autopsy report, and I think that we have gone through them in pretty good detail, but I'm not going to publish that, but it will go back with the jury. So at this time, Your Honor, the state does not have any additional questions for this witness.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Cruz.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to start where you just left off with this HCG. How is HCG measured, I guess, in milliliters?
It's an interesting unit, at least for the blood. It's milli international units per milliliter.
That is kind of a mouthful. So for purposes of our discussion, would it be okay if I just referred to the number rather than including that unit?
I think that's much easier.
You said that your autopsy, or rather the laboratory results that you submitted, came back and indicated an HCG of 7.3. Is that right?
Correct.
The reference range you indicated is 0 to 5?
Correct.
Which means that an HCG level less than 5 would be considered negative for pregnancy. Would you agree?
I agree.
And an HCG level between 6 and 24 would be in what I'll call kind of a gray area. Would you agree with that?
It's a difficult number for sure.
Once an HCG level gets above 25, it can be considered positive. Would you agree with that?
Are you referencing an at-home pregnancy test or?
Well, I'm going to ask you about that in a second. So why don't you go ahead and explain to me what you're thinking?
Well, I wasn't sure where you got the number from.
Okay. At what level of HCG, in your opinion, would someone be able to say definitively this person is pregnant?
Well, HCG is actually can be difficult to interpret, which is why it's important to have all information. As we discussed, someone could not be pregnant and have the miscarriage. I would need more information. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at, I guess is my point.
Okay. You indicated in your direct that the HCG level should increase during pregnancy.
It should, yeah.
At what point in a pregnancy is HCG at its highest level?
It doubles over periods of time, and I can't say off the top of my head when it would be the absolute highest, but we're moving into thousands at that point.
Did you say thousands?
Yes.
Is it tens of thousands?
It could potentially. Following it and knowing specific numbers is probably the best interpreted by, say, an OBGYN who follows them regularly. But yes, numbers become quite high.
In other words, this HCG level of 7.3 is very low, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And you mentioned, I think you said at-home or over-the-counter pregnancy tests. Let's talk about those for just a moment. Now, what was sent to the laboratory, was that a test result that came from blood? Or
Yes.
one of those other samples?
Blood.
And if you were to go to Target or your local store and buy a pregnancy test off the shelf, that's not going to test blood, correct?
Correct.
That's going to test urine.
Correct.
Is blood more, I don't know if accurate is the right word, perhaps sensitive to HCG levels than an at-home urine test?
Yes, absolutely.
And in looking at some of the tests that are out there, I'll tell you, the one that I found that claimed to be the most sensitive for detection of HCG bragged that its threshold was 10 HCG. Does that seem consistent with what you know about that hormone?
That's quite low. That is impressive.
If it's true, you would agree that is low,
Yes.
correct? And so what was detected in the blood sample you sent off is even lower than that.
That is correct.
In response to Ms. Slaughter's questions, you said it's possible that she missed her period, correct?
Correct.
It's just as possible she didn't.
Correct.
Because this could, assuming she was actually pregnant, it could have been as early as 2 weeks. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Now, let's say she had been pregnant earlier and had miscarried. How long does it take for HCG to, well, is it redissolved into the body?
It can be excreted. You eventually get rid of it.
How long does that take?
It depends. It depends on how high it is to begin with. Each person's different. If there's concern, a doctor can even track your levels to make sure it's going down.
With the information that you have, you cannot say that she was pregnant at the time of your autopsy, or at the time of her death, rather, correct?
Correct.
You can't say that she had been pregnant at an earlier time and miscarried, correct?
Correct.
And it sounds like if the latter was true, that she had been pregnant at an earlier time, you can't tell us how long ago that miscarriage occurred.
Correct.
Doctor, thank you. I don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
Redirect.
Just briefly, Your Honor. Dr. Cruz, I want to make sure that I understood your testimony. HCG comes from a fertilized egg, right?
Correct.
So it's never going to be in the blood unless there was a pregnancy.
There are tumors that can produce it, but with my autopsy, I did not identify a tumor. So for Ms. Hoffman, yes.
Okay. You would have seen the tumor during your autopsy.
Yes.
Okay. So for Ms. Hoffman, there's no tumor that created it, so it had to have come from a fertilized egg.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Eimerman asked you some questions about the accuracy of blood being greater than the accuracy of urine, right?
Correct.
And that even an at-home test, the best one that she was able to find, could detect HCG levels at a 10, if I understood her correctly. But that would still be through urine, right?
Correct.
There's no at-home tests that are testing blood.
Not that I know of.
Okay, me either. Would you also agree that a test ran through a certified and qualified lab is going to be more accurate than any at-home test?
Yes, I believe so.
So if an at-home test that tests for urine can pick up a 10, it's not that surprising that a certified lab that tests blood is going to pick up HCG at a 7.3.
Yes, it should.
Okay. You were also asked whether if you could say for sure that there had been a pregnancy versus a current pregnancy versus a miscarriage, right?
Correct.
But you can't say either way.
Correct. I cannot say either way. With certainty, both are possible.
The only thing you can say with certainty is that somewhere recent enough to still show up on an HCG test, Melody Hoffman had a pregnancy.
Yes.
Okay. I don't have anything further.
Cross.
Thank you. Doctor, with the 7.3 HCG level, there is no, so let me rephrase that. If Melody Hoffman was pregnant at the time of her death, and you identified an HCG level of 7.3, there is no over-the-counter pregnancy test that you are aware of that would detect through urine an HCG that low, correct?
Correct.
Nothing else, thank you.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
Thank you very much. You're excused. the state have other witnesses?
Your Honor, at this time, the state rests.
Thank you. Now is the time in the case where the defense has an opportunity to present evidence if it wishes. Does the defense have a desire to present evidence in this matter?
Sorry, Your Honor, the defense rests at this time.
Thank you. So jurors, we've reached the point in the case where we're at the close of evidence. I'm going to release you at this time until tomorrow morning, where you will be instructed on the law and then hear the closing arguments of the state and the defense. And so you'll be released until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Please remember that admonition, and we'll see you at 9 o'clock tomorrow. So have a good evening. We'll see you tomorrow.